That outfit off the rack was a huge disappointment to me. Don't waste my time. I don't want to see any H&M.
That was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
We all know there's been some queens over the years that we know don't have the best connection to the series, some more than others, but I wanted to make a video going through some of the queens that RuPaul doesn't necessarily like due to either drama that happened outside of the show, or more tame ones like Ru not seeming to vibe with them when they competed on her show. The list will consist of 24 queens. We'll slot them into different categories, and by the end of the video, we will have a final cast of 12 queens. But before we start, do you ever have those moments when you realize that your life is not the way you expected it to be? When I was like 18, I pictured my early 20s as this confident, sorted out era where I'd be thriving, professionally killing it, mentally unbothered, and just living. Instead, I'm navigating career changes, dealing with uncertainty, and of course, spiraling about it at like 2 a.m. I've actually done all sorts of therapy even throughout my late teens, and for a long time, it didn't click to me just how helpful it all really was for my mental health development. The truth is, you don't have to hit rock bottom to get support. You can just be a regular person trying to figure things out, and that's still valid. You probably heard all this stigma about how it's hard to find the right person to be vulnerable with. All of it can feel like a lot at first glance. That's where today's paid partner, BetterHelp, made it easy for me to even consider talking to someone again in the first place. A therapist isn't there to judge or fix you. They're there to listen, ask questions, and help you see things from a different angle. Sometimes all you need is a new perspective and someone who knows what they're talking about to start making real changes. BetterHelp is on a mission to make starting therapy less scary and more convenient. You just fill out a quick questionnaire and they'll match you with a credentialed therapist who fits your needs. And if it's not clicking, you can switch therapists anytime for free. No weird guilt and no awkwardness. They've got over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot. So it's not just me saying this. People really do trust the platform. And I, for one, am super grateful for the opportunity to be able to offer this to all of you who support my channel. So if you've been thinking about therapy or even are just curious about it, click the link in the description to get 10% off your first month. Now let's begin. To start off, we're going to be using 3 categories. First is the must-haves, which are the queens that will most likely make our final cast. Second is wildcards, where we're sort of on the fence of whether they should be included in the cast. And third is scrapped, where while it was nice to consider them, they just wouldn't make sense competing on the first All-Stars all hated by RuPaul. To start off, we have Pearl. Pearl always had a rocky relationship with RuPaul. Even on season 7, Ru famously admitted to only letting her make it all the way to the top 3 simply for the fact that Pearl was a cute boy, and she knew audiences would fangirl over her. And during the stare down between Pearl and Ru in the workroom, Ru was super close to just telling Pearl she'd be eliminated next. What makes the story between Pearl and RuPaul weird is just how swiftly everything happened. For years after season 7, everything was fine, but then one day, Pearl did an interview with Hey Queen, said an anecdote about how during one of the first interactions with RuPaul, she was telling Ru how much she loved and admired her, only for Ru to turn and say, quote, "Nothing you say matters unless that camera is rolling." Something that, according to Pearl, would end up affecting the way she viewed the competition moving forward. Regardless, even beyond the drama, looking back at season 7, even though she did last longer than she should have, she still had a lot of good moments throughout her run. She proved that if she wanted to, she could have a funny personality, with her Snatch Game being one of my personal highlights of her run, or even her point of view when it came to some of the runway themes. This would position Pearl as one of the early frontrunners in the all hated by RuPaul season of All Stars. Therefore, we will be placing her into the must-haves category of the list. Next is Courtney Act. This was probably one of the worst cases of RuPaul hating on a queen, just because it did hold back certain opportunities that maybe Courtney could have received. Don't get me wrong, Courtney went on to be a superstar. In fact, I made a whole video that'll be linked in the description detailing why she turned into such a mega reality TV star, with RuPaul's Drag Race being one of literally dozens of achievements that she's had. As you know, the whole beef between her and RuPaul came from a really petty story, where it was during the 2014 era and season 6 was in the middle of airing, people started criticizing the whole she-male segment. Long story short, many alumni from the past, especially trans women like Carmen Carrera, were calling RuPaul out on this online. Courtney Act ended up jumping in, agreeing with what the public was saying and hoping that RuPaul was going to be able to understand where everyone was coming from. Ultimately, that did not happen. RuPaul ended up blocking Courtney Act on Twitter, and she remained blocked for about 4 years before RuPaul unblocked her. But as we know, RuPaul went on to make the Drag Race Down Under franchise, a franchise that she hosted for 3 seasons until ultimately stepping down as host and handing the reins over to Michelle Visage. To this day, I firmly believe that if Courtney's relationship with RuPaul hadn't turned the way it did, Courtney Act right now would be hosting Down Under. Speaking facts though, she's easily in the top 5 biggest stars to have come out of the series. So we're gonna be putting her into the must-haves category. Next is Delta Work. Of course, Delta was actually RuPaul's hairstylist for a couple years. Her and Raven were both hired at the same time, and Raven famously told her that, quote, "We are not a package," that signaled that Raven was not going to be going down with the ship. That being said, Delta accomplished a lot in her time as RuPaul's hairstylist. In fact, she ended up winning an Emmy for one of the seasons, until ultimately getting fired from the whole production for reasons undisclosed. She would come back into the competition with something to prove, but the question is, would she be a right fit with the rest of the cast? For this reason, I'm going to be putting her into the wild card category. Now we have Tammy Brown. You know, automatically, I know that if Tammy's in this cast, she's going to be making sure to put RuPaul in her place any chance she gets. That makes me wonder, in this scenario where Ru agrees to have all the girls that she's hated back to compete on one season, would she be able to handle any shade that's thrown in her direction? That's the question. Tammy Brown's clocked RuPaul and the judges not once, but twice. Once in the season 1 reunion and another in All Stars 1 when she called out Michelle for questioning her fashion choices. Tammy strikes me as a no-nonsense type of individual. In fact, she'll probably be thinking that she's actually doing production a favor by agreeing to participate on this All-Star season. But even beyond the cutthroat tendencies of Tammy Brown, I think that to this day, we still don't know the full potential of what Tammy is capable of on Drag Race. Still though, there's a lot of other names we need to get through in this list, so for now, we're gonna place her into the wild card category. Now we have the Vixen. Listen, Vixen was always very outspoken about her position on the series from the moment she got on. She actually brought forward a lot of conversations that people were having in the shadows over the past couple of years leading up to season 10, but the Vixen would end up exploding it into the mainstream conversation of the general fan base. What I loved about the Vixen on season 10 is that she would not back down from anybody. To be honest, so many of her moments, even when she was disagreeing with the other girls, had me cheering at the TV. Back then, and even still today, I don't necessarily care about the details behind an argument between some of the queens on a season. Of course that matters, and it allows me to choose who's in the right and who's in the wrong, but even the very fact that two people are partaking in conflict creates interesting TV, and for that reason alone, I was always cheering for both sides. Everything Vixen said in every one of her arguments at the same time showed a lot of vulnerability from her. She's a storyline on the series that I really wish we could see a continuation of. There's so many queens that have returned to All Stars that didn't necessarily need to return to All Stars because we already knew who they were inside and out. The Vixen, I still think, has so much left to show, and I do hope somehow she returns to the series. That being said, we're gonna put her into the wild card category. Scarlet Envy. You may be wondering, well, why does RuPaul hate Scarlet Envy? While they never had any big dramas online, Scarlet Envy participated on season 11, All Stars 6, and UK vs. the World season 2. All 3 of these editions were hosted by RuPaul and years apart from each other. Despite that, Scarlet ended up having a pretty similar run on all 3 of those auditions. It was clear that no matter how much RuPaul would see of Scarlett, she never really connected. In fact, there's so many moments where RuPaul just has so much disdain in her eyes for something Scarlett did, whether it was during one of her lip syncs or something that Scarlett said on the runway. Even the infamous moment where during critiques, RuPaul tells Scarlett that something she did made him feel uncomfortable. Now, I can see why a lot of you asked me to include her on this list, but given that she's not as exciting as some of the other names, we're going to be putting her into the wild card category. Now we have Fifi O'Hara, aka Jeremy Carey. Look, I'm a mega Jeremy Carey / Fifi O'Hara stan, so anytime I get the opportunity to mention her, I'll 100% do it. She's arguably one of the first queens to really go against production in a big way. And I don't even have to reiterate how tragic it was that one of the biggest talents that we've gotten from the original era of the series would end up having to quit drag because of backlash from the fan base. Yet her legendary run still lives on to this day. And quite frankly, she would be one of my picks to win if this season were to ever come to fruition. So let's put Fifi into the must-haves category of this list. Now we have Carmen Carrera from season 3. Carmen's trajectory is so interesting because not only did she burn her bridges with World of Wonder, but she went on to have such a flourishing career without being attached to Drag Race at all. She successfully made it as a model and influencer, having a lot of connections within Hollywood. It's sort of impressive and lately has made me consider the idea of making a deep dive about her. But you guys can comment below whether you want to see that happen. So we're just going to be putting Carmen into the scrapped category. Now we have Mandy Mango from season 18. Look, season 18 did not deliver on entertainment, it barely delivered on looks, it barely delivered in lip syncs, and it barely delivered in viral moments. But one thing that it did deliver in is RuPaul hating Mandy Mango. Any chance she got, RuPaul would place her in the bottom, and quite frankly, it's one of the only things that I remember from the beginning of this edition. Yet, would it be too soon for Mandy to return? For now, we'll put her into the wildcard category. Up next is Denali from season 13 and All Stars 10. Denali is another queen that suffered on both seasons she was in. Yes, she did decent in both of them, well, better in season 13 than she did All Stars 10, yet she was also really overlooked. And it was clear that the judges just weren't vibing with her. I feel that it was most apparent during All Stars 10. And I have 2 reasons for this. First was the brackets, where within the purple bracket, obviously there was a lot of favoritism towards Ginger Minj, but in the second week, Denali ended up in the top 2 next to Ginger Minj and proceeded to do a lip sync to See You Again by Miley Cyrus. This was a controversial lip sync because it ends in Ginger being announced as the winner and Denali losing the lip sync. Now, there's a lot of different arguments that are floating around. Some people say that Ginger Minj won the lip sync because even though she was doing less, it was better than Denali because Denali was doing way too much. And I have this to say. Even if you think that Denali was doing way too much in her lip sync, which yes, even I can admit that she was a little bit too energetic there, it was still substantially better than what Ginger was delivering. Especially since Ginger had already won the week prior. So even from a sense of them wanting to make sure that Ginger will have enough points to qualify from the bracket, there was no need to give her the win of this lip sync. Instead, what it did was confirm to Denali that the judges once again were not seeing it for her. And so, after RuPaul announced Ginger as the winner and asked all of the girls to dance and celebrate like they do it at the end of every episode, Denali just walked off stage, something that RuPaul apparently found very rude. Now again, the brackets thing was one thing. Now I know people use the term, quote, they played in her face, but not only did they play in her face once during the brackets that ultimately resulted in her not qualifying from them, but also when it came to the grand finale, and the judges were allowed to pick from 3 different queens that had been eliminated so that one of those queens would be chosen to enter the lip sync SmackDown tournament. Well, not only were most of those queens not really known for lip syncing, Denali was arguably the only one that really had a chance at succeeding in the lip sync tournament at any capacity. Despite this though, the 3 queens they chose were Mistress Isabel Brooks, which made sense, Carrie Colby, which was a crazy choice for a lip sync SmackDown, and then Carrie Colby again, which was the ultimate what the F moment. It basically showed us that Denali was not even part of their consideration, which means that they either forgot that Denali was an amazing lip syncer, or B, they actively chose to just ignore it. Regardless, this type of pettiness from RuPaul and the judges is something that makes Denali perfect for this cast. So we're gonna be putting her into the must-have section of this list. Now we have Willem. This diva needs no introduction. If there was a leader of the rebel movement, it would truly be Willem, who would galvanize all the girls into leading her army against World of Wonder. So I'm not gonna even spend too much time on this one. Willem automatically goes into the must-haves category of this list. Now we have Naysha Lopez. RuPaul never seemed to really click with Naysha. On season 8, even though Naysha was a former Miss Continental and had achieved so much during her pageant history, not only did she end up in the bottom 2 and get eliminated on the first episode, but Ru brought her back into the competition on the 3rd week. And by the 4th week, she had been eliminated for a second time. It makes you wonder, well, season 8 was 2016, it was so long ago, maybe if she comes back to All Stars, everything would be different. Well, in case you forgot, she did come back to All Stars during All Stars 8 and got eliminated on the 2nd episode. And considering the first 2 episodes of All Stars 8 aired on the same day, it's like she basically went home first twice. So I can see RuPaul wanting to cast her just to do the funniest thing possible and have it happen a 3rd time. Yet for now, we're gonna put her into the wildcard category. So now we have Jane Don't. This is also a really recent queen, and I know RuPaul actually really loves Jane Don't. Yet a lot of you did ask me to include her on this list simply for the fact that Ru did eliminate her. Ru did put her in the bottom 2 despite having an amazing track record, and Ru did actually send her ass packing, even though at any moment she could have said, "Candy, candy, wait," and Jane would have been able to stay. Now, I'm not gonna lie, even though I'm trying to make it make sense, it doesn't really make sense to me why so many of you guys commented her name, but you know what? I'm gonna think about whether she should make the final cast and put her in the wildcard category for now. Now we have Jan. What I like about Jan's relationship with RuPaul is that sometimes when Ru doesn't really like a queen, she sort of ignores them, doesn't really pay attention to them, or gives them shady critiques here and there. With Jan, Ru pretty much toyed with her the way that a cat does with a rodent. She would hype Jan up to make her think that she was about to win a challenge only to hand it to somebody else. She had her placing safe for almost all the competition. And then when she returned to All Star 6, not only did she gag Jan again by not giving her the talent show win, which Jan thought she was about to get, but also even when Jan finally won her first challenge and had to lip sync against Jessica Wilde, she ended up getting clowned online for it because people didn't really like the lip sync. For now though, we're going to be putting her into the wildcard category. Now we have Joe Black from Drag Race UK Season 2. If you haven't watched UK Season 2, you've definitely seen the clip where RuPaul freaks out over Joe wearing an H&M outfit on the main stage. Now, Joe Black was a legendary queen from the UK. So when she finally got on the 2nd season, I guess many of the queens believed that she would automatically be a frontrunner and most likely to make it to the finale. Even though she actually did a really good job on the first episode, RuPaul would put her in the bottom 2, which many thought was a crazy decision at the time, but then she rightfully lost the lip sync against Bimini and ended up being the first queen to go home. However, halfway through the season, she ended up getting the opportunity to return to the competition, and she just looked so unbothered. Even when she did a bad job with her girl group and RuPaul was clearly upset about the lack of professionalism in their performance, Joe didn't seem to care. She was just joking around, and when the judges made a comment about her outfit, she was like, "Oh, it's H&M," and RuPaul just went ballistic. That's actually impressive in itself. The fact that Joe wasn't even trying to upset Ru and somehow her calmness was the final straw for RuPaul. That being said, I don't think Joe Black would be a good fit for this season. So Joe Black will be going into the scrapped category. Now we have Ginny Lemon, also from UK Season 2. It is fair to say that anyone that stands up to Ru will end up being blacklisted by RuPaul. That being said, Ginny's offenses are pretty low. As we know, right when her lip sync started, she was so fed up with the judges that she decided to just walk off without even bothering to lip sync, taking this decision away from RuPaul and into her own hands. It is a shame because Ginny was one of my favorite favorite queens during UK season 2. I found her personality to be really interesting, quite honestly, and her point of view of drag really reminded me of those classic drag queens from the pre-RuPaul's Drag Race era. For now though, we're gonna put her into the wildcard category. Up next, we have Utica from season 13. The reason people were asking for Utica to be included in this list was literally for one reason, and it's just because RuPaul robbed her of that design challenge win during season 13. Now, you guys had your voices be heard and I listened, but she's gonna have to be going into the scrapped category of this list, because we all know we will be seeing her back soon. Now we have Alaska, the queen whose relationship with World of Wonder / RuPaul was directly affected by her proximity to Willem, considering that they're both business partners. While typically Alaska would be a shoo-in, Alaska's return could bring back a magic to Drag Race that we haven't had in a long time. In fact, I can see RuPaul talking to her just once, and all of a sudden she would be in love with Alaska yet again. But there's only so many spots in the final cast, so for now we'll be putting her into the wildcard category. Charity Case from Drag Race UK Season 3. This is also one of those queens that did pretty well on their season. Yes, she had her fumbles, but the times that she did good, she would get barely any praise from the judges. That being said, we'll put her into the wildcard category. Now we have Marsha from Season 15. There's a lot of historical battles throughout history. There was Sharon versus Fifi, there was Alyssa versus Coco, and then there was RuPaul versus Marsha's makeup. No matter how much Marsha tried to show RuPaul she was drag excellence, RuPaul just wasn't buying it. Constantly making comments about how it didn't even look like she was wearing makeup, or how a lot of the outfits she was bringing looked really amateur. In fact, some of the queens have said in interviews that you can tell when Ru likes a queen, and when she doesn't like a queen. And then when it came to Marsha, there was a clear tension there. We'll be putting her into the wildcard category. Now we have Max from Season 7. This is also a queen that needs no explanation as to why she's on this list. The strange thing about Max is that she actually barely went against the series. I feel like there was only a couple instances where she went online and said in interviews how it was unfair the way that production had edited that final episode she was in. But that was sort of it. After that, she faded from the spotlight. And to this day, we barely hear about her. I mean, we do get updates here and there, but in terms of the demand that she had with the fan base right when season 7 was airing, is now a complete ghost to the presence she has now. I do think that they could have afforded having Max return to one of the earlier All-Star seasons. Like, I think she would have been perfect to be cast on All-Stars 4 or All-Stars 5 or All-Stars 6. Yet now it feels so far gone that it just wouldn't make sense. So we're gonna be putting Max into the scrapped category. Now we have Rock'em Sakura from Season 12. This is one of the more difficult eliminations from the double digit era, but something feels off about having her on this list because I don't think RuPaul necessarily hates her, since she most likely doesn't even remember her. But I would love to see Rock compete again, so we're gonna be putting her in the wildcard category. Now we have Gia Gunn. Now, you know that Gia has been begging for World of Wonder to open the doors and allow her to grace their TVs once again. We as an audience can only hope that they allow this to happen one day. So yes, we will be putting Gia Gunn into the must-haves category of this list. Finally, we have Robin Fierce from Season 15. If you watch the extended cuts of Season 15's episodes, then you'll see how in the weeks leading up to Robin's elimination, there was a lot of one-on-ones between her and RuPaul, a lot of which were extremely awkward. You could tell that Ru was frustrated with Robin because she just wasn't understanding the critiques that she was getting. There's even a moment shortly before the Snatch Game where RuPaul tells Robin that she needs to get out of her box, to which Robin says that she's pretty happy being within her box. That's the moment that I knew her time was counted.
Robin, I want to see how twisted you are. You're being very reserved right now. For the Snatch Game, you have to come out.
Again though, there's a lot of other queens that outrank her in terms of the passion that RuPaul had in her hatred. So we're gonna be putting Robin into the scrapped category. Alright, so let's do a quick rundown of who's in what section. So far in our must-haves category, we have Pearl, Courtney Act, Fifi O'Hara, Denali, Willem, and Gia Gunn. And then in the wildcard category, we have Delta Work, Tammy Brown, The Vixen, Scarlet Envy, Mandy Mango, Naysha Lopez, Jane Don't, Jan, Ginny Lemon, Alaska, Charity Case, Marsha, and Rock'em Sakura. and then in the scrapped list, we have Carmen Carrera, Joe Black, Utica, Max, and Robin Fierce. The 5 queens on the scrapped list are no longer part of our consideration. As I said before, the final cast consists of just 12 spots. And since there's 6 queens in the must-haves category, there's now just 6 spots remaining. Out of the 13 queens in the wildcard category, only 6 of them will be moving on to the final cast. So let's go through them. Off the bat, the Vixen catches my attention. Her whole storyline with Ru during the season 10 reunion, where after a heated exchange between the two, the Vixen just decides to get up and leave, was the ultimate slap in the face to RuPaul. And I only say this because right after she goes, you can see how frustrated RuPaul is in her argument with Asia O'Hara, where Ru flat out says that she feels like the Vixen is too far gone to warrant her any help. So we're going to be upgrading the Vixen to the must-haves category. When it comes to Rock'em Sakura, I just don't think she's that hated by RuPaul, so I'm just gonna scrap her. In the case of Charity Case, the same thing applies. I feel like for their cases, it wasn't necessarily disdain, but more so on the side of just boredom. When it comes to Tammy Brown, we will also be upgrading her to the must-haves category. Joining her will also be Delta Work. We know there's nothing worse for a boss than running in to one of your employees that you just fired a couple years ago. So why not make that nightmare come to life? We are now almost done building our final cast. With 9 spots filled, there's only 3 spots remaining. Yet there's still 8 queens up for consideration, meaning 5 of them will not be making it. The first person eliminated from this lineup has to be Marsha. While Ru likes having a toy to play with, it just wouldn't make sense to throw Marsha back into the ringer with the lineup of queens that she would have to compete with. Now, I know this is going to be a controversial pick. The next person to join the final cast of RuPaul's All Hated season will be none other than Jan. Yes, this is one of the classic modern season rivalries between a judge and a contestant, but we deserve to see this continuation. The next person upgraded will be Naysha Lopez. Now here's where things get difficult. There's only 2 spots left, but 5 queens remaining. We have Scarlet Envy, Mandy Mango, Jane Don't, Ginny Lemon, and Alaska. Alaska is taking more of a focus from me in this lineup, but my eyes are also going to Jane Don't and Mandy Mango. I guess since they're my top 3, I'm automatically gonna eliminate Scarlet Envy and Ginny Lemon. Alright, so out of these 3, considering Alaska has the longest history with RuPaul, she would go into the competition wanting to get that redemption, wanting to fix that connection that meant so much to her years back. So let's go ahead and add Alaska to this final cast. And there you have it, the final cast of RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars All Hated by RuPaul edition, consisting of 12 contestants: Pearl, Courtney Act, Jeremy Carey, Denali, Willem, Gia Gunn, The Vixen, Tammy Brown, Delta Work, Jan, Naysha Lopez, and Alaska. Which of these queens do you think would make the top 3 and ultimately take the crown? And who would have made your final cast? Let me know in the comments, and make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll see you guys next time. So if you've been thinking about therapy or even are just curious about it, click the link in the description to get 10% off your first month. I want to take a moment to thank my patrons. In the Elite Pink Squad, we have Matthew Burns, Gay Uncle, Sari Tish, Las Potitas, Cool Gal Nan, Jet Sam Adams, and Natasha De Leon. And in the Gay Squad, we have Lone Resident, Christine Gregory. And in the Green Squad, we have Cayman Rider Furry, Edgar Allan Pup, The Only Sean, IJS, Not a Punch But a Keek, Jack Beck, Galeria Gomez, Sarah G, Scarlet Rose, Boiled Peanut, Not an Omelet But an Egg, Max Whale, Dea, and Niall O'Hearn. If you'd like to see your name on the screen, you can support me on Patreon. The link will be in the description. I'll see you guys next time.